know people are still coming in, but we're gonna go ahead and get started. Like I said, we have quite a packed event planned, and I want to make sure that we have time for you to ask your questions of the panelists at the end and get some good interaction in. But thank you for joining us for Seismic's event, Life in a Biotech Startup. We'll be going all over what it's like to join a biotech startup and what to expect on the onboarding process within your first year, and some tips and advice on how to excel and succeed during that time. Just a quick agenda to give you an idea. We'll start with just a quick introduction to Seismic and to our three panelists. Then we'll go into a guided discussion with the speakers, going through some commonly asked questions about what the situation is like in startups, what to expect from the environment, and what would be expected of you as an employee. And then we'll have time at the end for you to ask some of your questions to the speakers as well. So if you'd like to that time ask the speakers directly or type it in the chat, either are fine. So I'll start by introducing Seismic. I'm Erin, obviously with Seismic, and Seismic is a talent matching platform and talent support platform for the biomedical sciences. We specialize in connecting scientists with specific skills to roles that are looking for those exact skills, in the hope that it creates a perfect match between a fulfilling environment for the scientist and a way to find the right talent to push innovation forward for the companies. As I mentioned, we're also talent support, so we also host events like this quite periodically to help you gain knowledge about the biotech industry, to decide whether it's something you want to join or are interested in, and also to prepare for the interview process and job seeking process. So definitely, if you're interested, consider joining Seismic to, with the Seismic profile, highlight your skill set for roles that you want to apply to, have a greater chance of getting called back from a hiring manager for each role that you do apply to, and in the support side, access free career development workshops like this one, and also get help from our specialists on resume building and interview prep if you're interested in that as well. So now I'd like to introduce our speakers. With Cassandra Philipson, who's a scientist at Avello Biosciences, Megan Zimmerman, who's a product manager at L7 Informatics, and Shu Wang, who's Vice President of External Innovation at TurtleTree. And I'd like to give them each a chance to tell you a little bit about themselves in their own words. So I will stop sharing now. And Cassandra, are you okay with telling the attendees a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. So good evening, guys. My name is Cassandra Philipson. I'll say my background. So I started, I guess, getting interested in biotech because I love biomedical research. I went to grad school and studied genomics and computational biology. After grad school, I found myself in a startup right after using some of the products that had been developed in grad school, going straight into that working environment, which was really exciting. But I was in Southwest Virginia for a very long time and decided it was time to move on. I've spent time after that as a postdoc in the government. And then I've since re-entered the biotech world, actually through Seismic earlier this year. So excited to share my experience with you all. Thanks for having me.
We're excited to have you. Megan, would you like to share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Zimmerman. I have a pretty heavy lab background, spent time working at Monsanto and Washington University School of Medicine, bouncing between agriculture and pediatric gastroenterology research. After that, I moved away from the St. Louis area and wound up in Kansas City, where I am today, and got involved in CROs, so clinical research organizations. And that sort of is what changed the trajectory of my career. I got really involved in the electronic data capture system, wound up managing that platform before moving on to a different company, working in product management. And one of the reasons that they hired me, in addition to my science background, was for the software experience that I had. And then I was able to translate all of that over to my time at L7, which is the first startup I've been involved in.
Very cool. Definitely looking forward to hearing a little bit about the differences between the CROs you've worked for and the L7 environment as well. Happy to have you. Shu, would you like to share a little bit about yourself?
Yes, for sure. Yes, my name is Xiao Wang. I actually have been experiencing this that it seems like every time I go to a conference or a meeting, I'm always the oldest person. So it seems like, we have the really two young people that have the new experience in biotech. I actually was in the biotech 25 years ago, and both companies didn't really make it. Then I can tell you more about that experience. Then I went back to a big company in Merck, Germany, or Sigma here in the US. But 25 years later, I decided to jump back into the biotech field in Turtle Tree. It's a cellular agriculture startup. And so I'm very excited to share my experience from the school days and also through biotech, back to the big companies and now back to the biotech. I have a genetics in my background, and I'm right now doing a lot of gene screening and technology screening. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So we'll go into the discussion. We'll hear a little bit about the presenter's experience and their advice, but also while you're listening to the answers for these discussion questions, think a little bit about their answers and what maybe follow-up questions you would like to ask, or what questions you're not hearing asked that you would like to follow up on during the Q&A session. So we'll start with what aspect of your experience best prepared you for your first industry role? We can go in the reverse order from last time. So Shu, what aspect of your experience best prepared you?
It's really hard to say because there was nothing preparing me when I was going into the biotech. I was, when I graduated from graduate school, I was doing my postdoc at Washington University in St. Louis. I was thinking about being a professor. And because of what I did, I felt like I can make better impact if I joined a company. But I always wanted to join the biotech because back then, 25 years ago, it was Genentech and Amgen. So it's a long answer to say that there's really nothing that can better prepare you for your first industrial job, except that I think because I was a postdoctor, I was a graduate person that basically allowed me to be very flexible. I was always eager to do more experiments when the professors or colleagues or collaborators want me to do something. I always wanted to participate and help out. And everything that I have done extra, even though it doesn't really benefit me in terms of my thesis or my paper, but because of all those things accumulated, it seems like I was very well prepared to join a biotech, because you will know that it's a very crazy world, that you're going to be wearing many hats, and sometimes you're hired to do this specific task. However, because you may have some other experience, then the company would certainly love to leverage your experience, so you're being pulled in different directions. So I think because I was always willing to work extra hard, help other people to learn new things, because of that being flexible, perhaps that prepares me a bit better when I join my first company.
Very cool to hear. Megan, what would you say best prepared you?
I actually agree a lot with what Shu said. When I was younger and first starting out after I graduated college, I used to think that these little things that I would do around the lab to create efficiency in the work that I would do were just for my benefit. And I would tell people, like, it's not about anybody else, it's about me. Like, I'm just trying to get my work done well and get it done quickly. And it was pointed out to me by a supervisor that I should think about it in a different way and figure out how I can leverage the things that I'm doing for my own benefit for the others. And after realizing that, I was going from job to job to job, doing all of this work and process improvement outside of my defined role that I was hired for, I realized that there was something more to it, and that it led me to become almost like a jack of all trades wherever I would end up. And so joining L7, I was originally hired as a product trainer, and I very quickly was able to leverage that back into working in product management. And I help out across multiple different departments. Like she said, you have to be ready and willing to reach outside of your defined role, and truly make the position your own.
Definitely. Kind of back to the wearing many hats and being prepared to do that. Cassandra, do you have a different take?
No, I think I'll echo both of the previous comments there. And again, I had bullet pointed my answers to this. One being, attitude matters so much. And again, I think being flexible is one of the main things that will help you be prepared for that industry role, because again, you might be hired for one role and then those priorities might shift really quick once you start working. Critical thinking, I think that that's something that, ultimately the example being if you come to work and you're identifying these efficiency problems, or maybe you've identified a process that needs to be improved, coming to, the table with not only having that problem, but also solutions, I think is really appreciated and valued in biotech. So if you're bringing problems to your manager, they're going to want solutions. So don't show up without those, and don't shy away from sharing your opinion. You have valuable expertise and experience. And then I would say, especially in the entry role, or I'm hired currently as a scientist role, my technical skill set did matter. I'm doing in vivo work. I had to have in vivo work for my background. So I do think if you're trying to find the right place to enter, finding a good match between what you already know how to do and what people are looking for, that's an easy way to add value from day one, knowing that you'll learn a lot once you get in the door.
So you'd say that skills kind of determine whether you're the initially kind of the good fit for the role, but a lot of these kind of where your mindset is. So if you're prepared to be kind of a leader in presenting solutions to problems, and open-minded and flexible, those are kind of the things that are going to determine the kind of long-term success and whether you thrive. Would that be a fair summary?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'd like to add to that. I really agree with what Consider said, because a leader actually is a person who sees the problem but doesn't complain about it and tries to find solutions to it. So as a junior person, what you can demonstrate that you have this leadership quality in the future is to identify the problems, but present it in such a way that's logical. And here are my solutions, so that you actually give the management a choice of how to solve the problems, instead of just trying to complain about certain things and you don't come with solutions. So I really agree with that. That's really a good thing that the young people should learn how to master, so that it will serve you really well, because everywhere you go, people are not there to listen to your problems. They want to hear about the problem, but what are your solutions?
What would you say is the most exciting aspect of working in industry, and particularly in the startup side of industry? We can go back again. Cassandra?
Yeah, so I think this is very person to person specific. For me, I love tackling really high risk projects, especially on the discovery front. I like making those go, no go decisions for companies. So I've specifically sought out roles that allow me to do that. So I find it, again, to say exciting, I find it really exciting to take the basic research concepts and then push them across what you might hear as like the medical or metaphorical valley of death, where a lot of papers or projects kind of die into product development. So, looking at cutting edge research and literature, asking how can we develop this into a product? How can we develop it further? How can we make this reproducible? And then ultimately, those advances get something into your customer's hands, and that's really rewarding.
Very cool. Megan, what would you say is the most fulfilling part of working in a startup? And if you want to compare it to some of the previous roles, feel free as well.
Sure. Yeah, a lot of it goes back to the process improvement for me that I mentioned previously. Going in and working in an environment where everything is fast paced, and like we talked about in the last question, they want to hear the problems, but only if you have solutions. And so going in and having the autonomy to enact changes and help improve the company as a whole, I love that. I've been able to go to my boss and point out that we had, some deficiencies in documentation. And now I have been responsible for building out our design history file for validation and releases of our software. And that's something that in previous roles, it would have been a ton of red tape. I would have had to make sure other people were on board. And usually, not that you don't have to make sure that other people are on board in my current role, but it was more about staying in my lane. in previous roles. Like they were glad that I had other passions and other ideas, but they really wanted me to focus where I was. And I feel like in my current role at the startup that I can do anything that I'm passionate about, and I love that.
It sounds like the company's benefited a lot as well from you being able to contribute maybe something that was not per se on the job description or within your realm of responsibilities, but something that you really realized, hey, this is a problem that, as we talked about being a critical thinker, hey, this is a problem that I have a solution for.
Yeah. Yeah. And being able to expand and think from so many different angles within the field. So, I was able to think about my time validating software at the CRO. I was able to think about my time marketing and what those materials look like to our users and how we need to present them from my time as a product manager at LabConco. I was able to bring all of those things together.
And what do you find most exciting about working at a startup?
What I found to be most exciting is the chance and also the opportunity to influence the results or the work. Because working for a big company, you're one of the many small wheels that sometimes your contribution may be overlooked. Maybe because you're too junior, maybe because you don't have the right people that you're talking to. Many things in the big organizations, but in a small startup, you have the ability to be talking to the CEO or to be talking to the director of this and that. And sometimes if you have the right people in the company, they tend to listen to you because everybody's in this boat. And we're trying to get this boat sailed through the storm and get to the place where we can be successful. That I find to be most interesting, just because I can make influence so that I can help the company achieve the goal. In our case, we want to achieve the goal of benefiting all the humanities when it comes to milk for the infants, for adults, and also for the future food protein sources. We believe that speed is the essence here. Yeah, that's what I found to be very exciting to work for startups or biotech companies.
Very cool. So for everyone here, if you're interested in being able to take the lead on projects, no matter what level you are, and be able to actually see directly your contributions and have them recognized for the products and projects you're working on, startup could be a good match for you. To the next question. What skills are you not expecting to use in your current role that have turned out to be very important? We'll start with Megan this time.
I don't know that I've really come across any of my previous skills and experiences that I wasn't expecting to use. I think I never really went into the role, my original role at L7, and thought in any other way than I was going to do that role, but I was also going to reach out for other projects. And I think that was because when I was going through the interview process, like she said, you get to talk to everybody. The CEO and president of the company called me during my interview process, and I got to talk to him and what he thought the role could look like. And we discussed what I was interested in and what I was hoping to do in addition to that work. And it was the same with my hiring manager. So I think for me, I went into it with a very open mind and was really eager about leveraging all of my skills to make the job successful.
Cassandra, did you run into any skills that you weren't expecting to use?
I wouldn't say that I've run into any skills that I didn't necessarily already have in my wheelhouse tucked away somewhere. So I feel the same as Megan as that, but I will say never underestimate the power of soft skills, especially in a startup environment. Your team is really small. Gossip can, spread like wildfire, if you will. So learning to be able to engage with people, provide critical feedback is really important. Like radical candor is a nice buzzword if people like that. Knowing how to, I think, get stakeholder buy-in. So because you do have this kind of, there is a hierarchy, but it's very flat. You do get to sit down and talk with CEOs. You might be able to influence them to take on some of your ideas. That's really exciting, but it takes some finesse, I think, especially coming from a technical side where I'm a super nerd and I am very task oriented. I don't always come off as a super warm person. So I've had to take some I think, training and coaching sessions on how to communicate in like team environments. So I highly encourage like softening your soft skills if possible.
And I can definitely say from the seismic side, having talked to a few hiring managers, that a lot of the interview questions that they'll ask you are kind of getting at whether you have those soft skills or transferable skills. So you might get asked about, how do you take feedback? If there was a disagreement in the lab, how would you handle it? Things like that are really important because they know that those kind of soft skills are going to become really important, especially when you're so team oriented in the company as well. Shu, what any skills that you weren't expecting to use that you ended up using?
Yes, I wasn't expecting that when I joined the Turtle Tree. I'm actually the oldest person in the company. So I guess they're looking for adult supervision or people with some experience because these are just full of young people, 20-year-old, 30-year-old. They're all doing their best, trying to change the tires when the car is running at full speed. And so I guess my past experience of being very collaborative with others and being very helpful to others, whether it's work related or private issues. And people tend to look at me as somebody who's a little bit like Yoda. So I guess so this is a little bit unexpected skill set that I was expected to do in the Turtle Tree. I'm the unofficial chief mentor in the company. So that's something I didn't expect.
Something you and Cassandra both touched on, the team dynamics and being able to work in a team and having a role in the team to fill, very important. What can a job seeker do before obtaining a role to best set themselves up for success in their first year, in your opinion? Cassandra?
So I think this was one of the pre-read questions I had the hardest time, coming up with my advice for. So I'm going to steal someone else's advice. When I was going through this process a year ago, I actually came across the advice to literally take a call with every recruiter that reaches out to you. And I like that advice, I think, for 3 reasons. The first, it builds your confidence. I think it gets you used to talking to people about what you're doing, refines your pitch, gets you really ready to like get in the startup environment. But also it allows you to orient yourself to the biotech landscape. So I would say high level, I learned more about venture capitalism by talking to recruiters than I did, once I joined the company and I knew what kind of questions to ask. So you can learn the landscape, you can learn what kind of positions there are out there, what kind of standard levels there are. And so I guess that's like the third thing that is useful about these conversations is you can use them to sort of assess where you're situated to enter, whether you're a scientist or a senior scientist or a principal scientist, whether you're a program manager, those kinds of things. And I think you can get feedback on what skill sets are sort of standing out, why recruiters are reaching out to you, and if that's why you want, or if those are the skills you want to be highlighting. So I started doing that and I found it really, really helpful. So I would just pass on that advice.
Definitely, I agree with getting used to talking to recruiters, especially if they're recruiters who are not specifically in your field. Because I think as scientists, we're used to talking about what we do in very jargon-heavy terms, and a lot of interviewers are looking for more couple sentence answers, kind of get to the point details. And so I definitely agree with practicing talking to recruiters where it's a little bit less high stakes. It's a great way to get used to that as well for an interview. Megan?
Yeah, I really agree with everything that Cassandra said. I think once you actually have the role though, and going into that start date, it's really important to make sure that the expectations that you have for what your role is are really well defined, and that communication is there with your hiring manager. The last thing you want to do is go in and not feel prepared and not be able to meet their expectations for you. And then also, take some time to think about, what the company does, other things that you might be interested in, and how you can leverage your other skills to to help make you a well-rounded employee in a startup, because like we've talked about, the reality is that you're never going to only do your role. And the more that you can help other areas, the more successful the company is going to be.
Any additional advice for job seekers to excel in their first year?
Um, I would say that I remember many years ago when I started, I was so eager to do everything. I'm doing like 10, 20 different projects at the same time. And during the first 3 months, my supervisor came to me and we sat down and talked about my performance. And he said, "Shao, you're doing really great. You're such a wonderful person, knowledgeable. You're doing everything great. However, you're not doing anything, finishing any project." So that is something I learned that yes, you want to help as much as you can, but you better make sure that what you're assigned to, you take care of that first. Then when you have excess time and capacity, that you can do extra things. And that is something I think that everybody has to learn, that you make sure you're able to take care of what you're supposed to do. When you do a great job, you build a confidence and people see that you're really a good performer, then you can get bigger, much bigger responsibilities and bigger projects being assigned to you. So that's what I would advise young people, that for the first year, make sure you understand what the assignments are, what are the problems, and you focus on that. Make sure you get that done first before you start doing too many things.
I imagine the temptation is potentially even greater in a startup when it's a smaller team to want to help everyone with everything.
Yes. Yes, it is okay to say no, which I didn't learn how to do until many years later.
Yeah, I would say it's pretty easy to back yourself into a corner with too many projects, saying yes to everybody, and you run the risk of burning out really fast. And that's the last thing that you or the company wants. So I definitely agree with that.
What can someone expect from their first month in a company? I know that's typically the phase that you'd be calling onboarding or something similar. What does the onboarding process look like in a startup from your experience? Megan?
Um, so this was my first role in a startup, but it was also my first role where I was entirely remote. So the onboarding process was very different. Um, I had to make more of an effort, whereas other people would have, kind of helped lead me through things, but taking more of an effort to reach out to individuals over Slack, or set up Zoom calls to really start understanding what I needed to do, and what I needed to prepare in order to be successful in that role. The time that I came in, the company, I think I was employee number 53, but we were rapidly growing. We have over 120 people now, and that was all within a year. But when I joined, the training materials were very much a work in progress. And so being able to identify those gaps and going out and finding the knowledge that I needed to be successful, and then in turn help backfill and make sure that the next person behind me had what I didn't.
Shu?
Yeah, so for a big organization, it seems like it's very structured. There's this onboarding process, and your supervisor may organize how to introduce you to different people, and also begin to give you a quick rundown on all the project status so that you get some idea what has happened. So that's really great. But in the startup, you're a new person, you're probably the most needed person. There's a warm body, they need you, right? So you're gonna have people coming to you and say, "I want to talk to you, I want to tell you this thing and that thing." And you'll be pulled in many directions. People want to talk to you. And so you'll be facing this really crazy environment where everybody wants to talk to you because they want you to work with them, they want your help. And so that's going to be what you're going to be experiencing in the first month for sure. But I think that you should also try to reach out to as many people as possible to introduce yourself. You don't have to wait until your supervisor introduces you to people, just make sure as HR for your org chart and see which ones are the ones that you'll be working really closely. Reach out to those people first, but then you later on reach out to other people as well. So it's gonna be crazy, that's for sure, especially in a startup, because you're just another great person. They just hired, they want you, they need you. So you'll be pulled many directions in the first month. But that is
Like a
also a
lot.
good sign because you are needed, so that's also good.
So a mix of getting told to a lot of projects, but also needing to set aside time to get to know the team and build those important bonds.
Definitely. Yeah. And also make sure you know the secretary of your boss. She or he's going to be the most important person that can get you the appointments anytime you want if you're on their good list.
Cassandra?
Yeah, I think everybody's already said it, but onboarding looks really different. My onboarding looked really different than the people who onboarded 2 weeks after I joined the company. So it's a work in progress oftentimes. But you can expect, I think, trainings that are company specific. One of the main ones that I've seen routinely that they make sure to put up front is like a legal team will meet with you to make sure you understand sort of the company specific lingo of what's confidential or not, how to read, I think, what's been annotated on certain documents, what can be shared or not. You should be like electronic lab notebooks, make sure you have access, make sure you poke around before you have to make an entry to figure out how those work. Look through data. I think make an assessment of whatever people have already been doing. Try to, again, come to meetings understanding a little bit more than just expecting things to be explained, because when you're starting, again, everybody's moving at warp speed, and you might not, like, you're responsible for catching up. I think you can be handed a lot of documents, so try to read. I think, again, I'm coming from the scientist technical side of things. And then in terms of getting to know people, definitely like reach out, get coffee, etc. But I also highly recommend putting that recurring weekly meeting, or however frequently you like to meet with your manager, on the calendar from week 1. And by the end of the first month, try to set, again, expectations and goals for at least the next 6 months. That's going to help a lot in terms of looking back at what was successful and what wasn't successful versus it being a moving target throughout the year.
As in scientist role, you're using a lot of technical skills as well. When you said kind of it's warp speed, is it learning new technical skills, or were those kind of already in place, and the kind of warp speed is just getting acclimated to kind of the business side of science and the way the particular company handles it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's from both angles. So certainly you're learning the business side, but I think, like everybody already mentioned, you're working on multiple projects all at once. You're probably going to be pulled in multiple directions. You might be, hey, for my first day here, I was already pulled into helping with a takedown and isolating cells and doing flow cytometry. Those were skill sets that I already had, and they used the opportunity to make sure I knew the SOP internally. So training is kind of in real time on the technical side. And then if you have, again, areas of opportunity or recommendations to move forward, I think, again, managers love those ideas if there's some justification, but warp speed on all fronts.
Are you, there's one more follow-up question to that. Are you given leeway to fail or stumble now and again, or is the expectation pretty high?
I think that's a really good question, and I would say it's going to be really manager specific, and that's something people should try to hone in on when they're going through the hiring process. So I wanted to make sure that I was given the leeway to have some reasonable ramp up time. And I can say personally, like, I had a really great experience with this current role where my manager gave me like 3 months to just kind of play, run some animal models on my own, make sure I could do some test assays. I can't say that that's the norm in all places. But I think that's something you and your manager hopefully can come to a good agreement on that you're comfortable with. And I would say primary thing is communicate to your manager that you're comfortable running what you're doing. Don't be afraid to ask for help with your teammates or other people who know how to make sure that moves forward.
And then the last question we have planned before we go into the participant questions is, what would you say would be the biggest adjustment in joining a startup? And this could be whether you're coming from, I believe a lot of the participants are coming from academia. So if you could share kind of what your advice is concerning that, but also what it would look like coming from another larger company as well. We can start with Megan.
I think the biggest adjustment for me was just the access that I had to other people within the company. You know, I went from Monsanto, which is a behemoth of a company, to a pretty mid-sized CRO, down to a small family like started lab manufacturing equipment. And so like I kept just kind of getting smaller and smaller, but it was still so different starting at L7 and immediately being able to just have calls with the president of the company and being able to get involved in projects where just by looking at my title, I had no business being in those calls. But you know, my thoughts and ideas were well received and people want to hear from you. So I think that was the biggest change for me and was a really nice surprise.
And you, what would you say would be the biggest adjustment participants could expect?
Well, I guess for me, it was when I was a postdoc, I was at night running the Ethernet cable, setting up the internet for the department. I was the computer guy who, you know, sets up all the laptops for everybody else. And the first day I was in the company, I said, "Oh, we're using Mac here, and you know, you're doing internet here. I can do it for you. I can help you." The IT guy says, "No, you're not here to do the IT. You're here to do the science." So that's when I learned that sometimes something you have to get used to, that the company is somewhat structured more than the academic labs. There are certain departments and that are there to help you, to serve you, instead of like in the academic lab. Sometimes you're doing everything because you know the department doesn't have somebody to do certain things for you. Yeah, so that's my experience. That you just have to be surprised by some of the new structures that you'll be given, and somehow you try to fit in and try to use those services for your advantage.
Cassandra, what would you say the biggest adjustment?
So I'll frame my my answer in the context of my position, which is again coming from an academic background. I'm a scientist. I'm a technical person, and I think this is a shared sentiment that I've talked to other scientists about. So it probably depends on your role. I'm in a drug development startup, so running again preclinical animal models to test different candidates. What I'm most surprised by when I've worked either adjacent to or in startups is what is sometimes called the MVP, which is the minimum viable product. So coming from academia, you have this really high standard for what's considered conclusive evidence, and you might really want to exhaust a hypothesis. In the startup environment or biotech, you might not exhaust it in the same way, and it's not that you're cutting corners or not being rigorous. But I think it's figuring out maybe a little bit more breadth to the question rather than depth, in my experience. And it's really about like matching up what's important to the company to move the product forward. So you might be pushing limits of what you would consider, conclusive evidence internally to make decisions. And that's again for go no go. Should we go to the next step? And this can be again sort of iterative and agile. And yeah, I think that was an adjustment for me because I like the deep dive work, but you might just not have the time or the need to figure everything out. If something's working well, sometimes you don't need to figure out exactly why, and that was an adjustment for me.
Sounds exciting. Like you said, the go no go. I remember you said at the beginning is one of the things that making those decisions is something that you really thrive on.
Absolutely, yeah. No, it's not a negative thing, and I think you learn things in a new way. So again, you're asked to kind of like zoom up and down, like a 30,000 foot view of, okay, how is this important to the company? How are we moving forward? And I like the strategic thinking of that approach. So I personally have enjoyed it. But it's different than maybe preparing a manuscript for a peer review journal that you might have experienced, or the rigor of like your thesis, for example. Just different. Neither one is better or worse.
So we have a good 20 minutes left for participant questions. And I'd like to give people opportunity. You could put your questions in the chat and I'm happy to ask them for you. But I'd also like to call on some people who have put questions in the chat to see if they'd like to ask them directly. First one I see, Nazim, I see you have two really good questions in the chat. If you're here and interested.
Hi, thanks for organizing and thanks to the panelists. I'd like to know what to be cautious about when somebody is interviewing for a very small biotech. And the other question is, like, during negotiation, what should we ask for, really? Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone's free to answer, but yeah, when you're maybe considering a very small biotech, what are some things, questions you can ask or some information you could look for to help you make the decision that decide whether it's a good fit or maybe it's not in the best place as a company?
Well, maybe let me go first. I think if you're going to join a really small one, that means the funding may not be there, and maybe just they're still in the stealth mode, or maybe they're in the process of trying to get some money, seed money. And this is where you have to be convinced you really want to join this small startup because the risk is so high. And when they don't have money, that means you're going to be restricted in many things that you wanted to do to get the project done. So that also means that you better love what this company's main mission is, what this company is going to produce. And if you don't have those answers satisfactorily answered to yourself, then you're going to be into a world of shock. One day when the money's running out, you don't have a job left. And also the experiments don't work out well, but you need to work really hard, do extra work, spend extra time. It all becomes a problem for you. So I would say that make sure if it's a small startup you want to join, first of all, find out about their funding status. If they have some $1 million, $2 million, good for 1 or 2 years, okay, that's better. But make sure what they're doing is what you want to do. Spend 2-3 years of your life working hard for that technology. You better make sure you love it.
And Cassandra, I'd like you to, if it's okay, answer the negotiation question, because I know you, maybe not as recently, but you mentioned kind of going from academia and some government to the Velo, and I know that especially coming from academia to getting an offer at a company, the offer money can seem like, oh wow, that's a lot, but maybe it's just compared to what you're making in academia as like a PhD or a postdoc. Can you talk a little bit about what to consider during negotiation?
Sure. So I definitely went to Glassdoor and tried to see if there was anything posted on that site for what I was applying for, specifically at my company, as well as like just general salary range and comparative benefits for what to expect to negotiate. And I actually talked to my seismic person and made that clear up front because from a high level, I was teetering between a senior scientist and a scientist role when I was interviewing at a few different companies. I really liked the company that I ended up with, but it was a lower position. So I advocated for maybe a higher salary, and I did that through the seismic, I guess, recruiter. I don't know if you're considered a recruiter on that front, but the seismic person I was working with, Helen, she was great. And so she and I had that discussion up front, and that was something that was negotiated. I was not a part of that discussion, actually. It ultimately was promised that the offer would reflect the discussion that the seismic person had with my HR, and it did. So I was fortunate that I didn't end up going too in the weeds with negotiation. But things that you can look at, so things that were part of my offer were my base salary, a signing bonus, which I think, again, if you're moving away from a company or you're taking a different role and there's a price cut, or maybe you were hoping to make a little bit more, you can always consider signing bonuses as a way to do that. Stock options are certainly on the table. And then health insurance, gym memberships, the whole pamphlet will come your way, and I think you can make a good decision on what's available to you and what you want to get out of your experience. Did I answer the full question for you? I don't know if there's any follow-up on any of those points, but
yeah, that's great. Thank you. I have so many questions, but I mean, I'm gonna let other people to ask as well. Thank you.
Or you can always just reach out to us, and I'm happy
Yes.
to talk.
I
Yeah.
appreciate that. Thank you.
I'm sure they're okay with you following up with that. So Carlos, if you're still here, would you like to answer? Would you like to ask your question?
Yes, I'm here, but give me just 1 second. I had a problem with my computer, and give me a couple minutes, please.
Yes, we'll come back. So Perrin, are you here? And if you'd like me to ask your question for you as well, that's okay too. I'll go ahead. I'll go ahead and ask this one. How much can an employee who's in a scientist position be involved in business and management side of a startup? Let's kind of talk about like wearing different hats, especially if they're interested in learning how to establish and manage a startup. So if someone's coming in as a scientist but interested in learning a little bit more about the business development side, is there opportunities for that?
Actually, I'm a perfect example of that. I started as a scientist, and because I showed some interest in business side, and I was put on a project to develop a business plan. And because of that, I was assigned mentors to help me deal with the finance related stuff and the business related, the P&L, profit and loss calculations. So I guess you just have to show this is your interest by communicating with your supervisor, and they may see there's a suitable small project for you to be involved. And that's how you get involved. You're not going to be going to a company and say, I want to do business development. I want to be the manager of this department. People will give you the job. It's all through expressing your career development interest. And if you have a good supervisor, he or she will make sure that this is being addressed when the right project shows up, and you begin to make your small contributions in that project. And also make sure that if you want to be a business development person, and perhaps the director of a business development group or the VP of a BD group, you can make sure that you talk to that person, see if he can be your mentor. He can give you some guidance on what are the things that you can do to prepare yourself. Maybe be part of a due diligence team. Maybe be part of the team that evaluates new technologies, or be helping out on some due diligence. Negotiation, joining the negotiation, learning the rope. Now, there's many things that you can do by small steps, asking the right people for help, at being part of a small project in the very beginning. So to get yourself exposed, that's what I would recommend you to do.
Would you say that you mentioned earlier kind of at larger companies, sometimes it's this is the role you're hired for and this is what you're expected to do. Would you say that is there more or less or about the same opportunities to kind of diversify your experience, should we say, into different areas of the company at a startup versus a large company?
Sorry, I'm gonna keep talking here. I think the big companies offer you more opportunities just because the company is larger, the company has more departments, and they're doing more things. But I think the beauty of a small startup is that you can be really talking to the decision makers really that closely. In a big company, you may be like 10 levels away from some directors. But in a small startup, you're just like the next person. So sometimes, yeah, I mean, the opportunities number may be less, but I think for you to get the opportunity to do something about it, I think it's actually higher than big companies.
Makes sense. See, Carlos is back. Go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, hello, I'm from Colombia, so I have a question. I graduated from biology, like a month ago. I'm interested to start a career in the biotech industry, but the problem is in Colombia here, there is no biotech industry. There is little industry at all. So how can I, as a foreigner, start my career in the US or Europe in a third world country really in the biotech industry? Because it's kind of hard because I'm from the outside, so I had to go to a lot of paperwork. So a lot of companies are not willing to go through all that when they could just hire someone from their country. So how could I, get my first job or begin in the biotech industry?
So usually for a foreign person, it can be difficult to find jobs here in the States. However, if you were doing some academic projects and you have collaborators in the US or in Europe, and usually this is the way that you can begin to expose yourself to those people in the field in the same area. They may be from academic, they may be from startups. And it is through those type of collaborations and people know you because of your work. That really is probably your best way to get noticed. Other than that, I think it's very difficult because nobody knows who you are, and maybe you have a great academic achievement, but nobody knows about it. And so I would suggest you that to make sure that while you're still in school, make sure that you have good collaborations with scientists from the West, from the US or from Europe, and that will help you tremendously. Looking at the biotech startups here in the US, I would probably dare to say that more than 50% of people or the founders can be foreign born. They are not people born here in the States. They're all from foreign countries, and more than 60% of the workforce in the biotechs are actually are immigrants. So these are people either they come here to go to school or they already have some established contact connections when they were back in their home countries. So that's what I would say.
I think, Cassandra, you also had something to say as well?
I think I'm just echoing maybe the diversity that is what Shu just said, but there are certainly opportunities for immigrants and non-US citizens. I think my company is at least 50% non-US citizens, so I hope that's kind of encouraging. I know that there are some options when you look through some job seeking platforms, they allow you to select whether or not you would need a visa to work. And so I think that, again, just finding places that are open to hosting or not, and again, maybe considering an academic path first, which is a way a lot of people do get here on a visa and then finish school and find a startup afterwards. But finding other people who have also made that journey is probably important. So I think there's programs that help immigrant or people who are interested in getting in that program. Again, feel free to reach out and I can connect you with people if that's something you're interested in.
Yeah, thanks a lot. That would be great. Thanks a lot.
Edmund, you here? Would you like to ask your question? I think it's a good one. What are so about networking into biotechs? I know you've mentioned reaching out, but how do you prefer people reach out to you if they're interested in networking and learning more about a company? What would you say is a good starting message or starting point? Let's start with Megan.
I leverage LinkedIn quite a bit. Even if it's just searching for companies within the biotech industry, finding something that you're passionate about and reaching out to somebody just to ask them about the work that they do. In my experience, most people have been willing to respond, even if it's not ongoing correspondence, but just being able to learn more about the company that way and developing those contacts.
I'd agree with Megan that LinkedIn is a really nice way to start the conversation. Cold emails are probably good too, but I would be a little less suspicious if it were LinkedIn for whatever reason. It's the way it is right now, I think.
Is there a kind of an etiquette, what would a good initial message look like? Or which ones would you be more likely to kind of disregard?
The ones that I replied in LinkedIn are the ones that people actually have written something about what I'm working on, that they're interested in, what the company does, and this is what I'm doing. Instead of saying that I want to connect with you, or this is a standard way to connect, those are the ones I usually don't even reply, even though I may have missed some golden opportunities with talented young people. But those sometimes I felt like they just want to make connections because they want to have more people in their network. I just felt like if you can, this is a person you really like to reach out to, you really want to talk to him to gain some information, some advice, make sure you study that person's profile and that company that the person works for, and have something that you show that you have studied this person and I have something that I want to discuss with you. That really helps me to accept your invitation through LinkedIn.
That's good advice. Denny, do you want to ask your question? See, it's a popular one. I see someone else has said that.
Yeah, so I can just, okay. So my question was, what is the work-life balance like in a biotech startup?
I think it depends for everybody, right? I have a young son, I have a family, and so, I've been in positions prior to those things where I had no problem working myself like around the clock, being really passionate about a particular project and I'm wanting to give it my all, but my priorities have shifted. And so I think it's what you make of it. It's also, again, establishing those expectations during the interview process. I honestly, I don't think I would go on with an interview if somebody were to tell me that they expected me to work, every weekend or off hours. Like, to me, those things are meant for critical projects, critical deadlines, not a common expectation.
And again, I would say just to echo Megan, I think it depends on the startup. It depends on the role. So for instance, I am doing in vivo models and I have to take care of my 7 days a week. And that's something that I think, again, making sure I understood that up front, which I did. And, you have that discussion with the hiring manager and being realistic about what your expectations are is really, really important. So it doesn't necessarily look like, a 9 to 5, but I think that it can for some people. It just depends. And I think it's harder, I think maybe for the technical side of things, if you are working with animals or you have experiments that require you to be hands-on. But I think if you're coming from that background, you probably understand that and are taking that into consideration.
Well, this is the one I'm going to say I'm the worst person that can give you advice on life and work, the balance there. I think that when you love what you're doing, sometimes you can get just overboard. You spend all this time working hard, you neglect your own family, and so therefore I'm not a good person to give you advice there, except to say that make sure whatever you do that you love, that you're working on, but make sure that the loved ones are also being paid attention to. Because time just goes by like that. 30 years ago, I was the youngest person in a room. Today, I'm always the oldest person. My kids are all growing up. And so just make sure whatever you do, you always spend time paying attention to the ones that you love. Make sure you give them some time. So then that's all worth it.
And like the panelists said, it varies. Okay.
Oh, I was just going to say, it depends on what you're going into. Obviously, like Cassandra said, she has experiments that she has to take care of 7 days a week. My experience working with software, one of the things that has also helped me maintain that work-life balance is having the flexibility from my manager to essentially make my own hours. So being able to work around my family and some of those obligations has made a huge difference.
Thank you so much.
Let's try to get in one more question real quick. How has the pandemic affected lab work in biotech companies? Has hands-on work changed significantly?
I'll comment from the lab side maybe. I think there was an initial few months where things were ramped down just as we kind of assessed what was going to happen, given we didn't work on SARS-CoV-2 work at all. So there was no need to maybe press forward in that early month or two of uncertainty. But after I think the mask mandates were there, and then again, I live in Massachusetts, everybody was mandated to get vaccinated. Our company actually mandated everyone to be vaccinated if they came back into the office. We sort of resumed as normal in person as early as April this year. So I would say I've been in every single day. The pandemic didn't really affect the need to continue getting experiments done. And it was, I think, a huge burden for HR, but figuring out how to make sure that that was comfortable for some people. You know, we did have some employees who were pregnant and they weren't comfortable coming into the lab. Again, not knowing what the effects of COVID-2 were on pregnant women at that time or getting vaccinated at that time. So working with HR, I think there were use cases and specific cases where people were able to figure out how to postpone some of their lab work. But in general, we were expected to come back in probably a lot earlier than a lot of the other places that I worked at. And, you know, I have colleagues there who are still not working in person yet.
I know, Megan, your work is pretty much all remote, and L7 is pretty flexible about a lot of employees working remotely.
Yeah, you know, it actually didn't start that way. When I interviewed last November, there was discussion originally around would I be willing to move to Austin, move my family to Austin, Texas, you know, in a year, 2 years, whenever things with the pandemic had settled down enough. And that was something I was open to. I told them that it wasn't like a guarantee, but, you know, in that time, they quickly realized that the work that we were able to produce, primarily working through Slack and Zoom, was more than effective. And so then they started broadening the search for people. And now we have people all over the world that work for the company, and there is no expectation to relocate.
Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us, and hope to see you again next month for our next event, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Good luck, everybody.
Thank you.